Have you ever wondered why some women seem to leave a man haunted by their absence, long after she has stepped out of his life? It is not her beauty, nor even her kindness, that binds him in the corridors of memory. It is something rarer, more dangerous, something given so sparingly that when it becomes a mark on his soul. Men do not ache for what they have in abundance. They ache for what is scarce, what is sacred, what is guarded as though it were the last relic of a forgotten temple. And this is the thing you must never give a man unless you intend for him to be unable to unsee you in the landscape of his own fate. A man, in the Jungian sense, is not merely flesh and mind. He is a battleground between the archetypal hero and the lurking shadow. He is ruled, often unknowingly, by the anima, the feminine imprint in his unconscious that colors every desire, every infatuation. When you give him the deepest access to your emotional sanctuary too soon, you bypass the labyrinth of his pursuit, and you rob him of the journey his soul requires to anchor you as his own. It is not cruelty, it is nature. The masculine must quest. The feminine must guard the grail until the quest is worthy. Most women give away the grail without a trial. They confuse generosity with intimacy, thinking that unfiltered vulnerability from the start will secure loyalty. But in reality, the male psyche interprets unearned emotional access as a gift from the gods, delivered without pilgrimage, a thing of beauty. Yes, but not yet worth the fight to protect. The mind devalues what the soul did not bleed for, and so the giving becomes the undoing. The Stoics understood this in their own language. Seneca warned that what is given without effort is received without gratitude. This is not cynicism. It is the recognition of human nature's economy. Desire is not born from constant nearness, is forged in the fires of distance, longing, and the occasional frost of withheld warmth. A man's hunger for you lives in the space between his reach and your retreat. To erase that space is to kill the hunger, and here is where the modern woman, untempered by the wisdom of the ancients, often loses herself. Conditioned by a culture that preaches over-availability as proof of worth, she abandons the art of mystery. Yet the animate, the feminine ideal in his mind has always been cloaked, elusive, half-seen. She is the lady at the edge of the forest in his dreams, vanishing just before he arrives, compelling him to wander deeper. When you reveal all of yourself, too quickly you cease to be the dream. You become the landscape he's already mapped. There is a current in the male soul that flows toward what he cannot fully hold. This is not about games or manipulation. It is about rhythm, about knowing that intimacy is like the ocean tide. Too much pull and the shore erodes. Too much push and the water recedes into disinterest. The empowered woman understands the necessity of ebb and flow. She offers moments of profound connection, then returns to her own world, leaving him to wrestle with the emptiness she creates. That emptiness becomes his compass. To withhold in this way is not cruelty but alchemy. It transmutes curiosity into devotion, infatuation into reverence. The man begins to assign meaning to every fragment of you he encounters. Your laughter becomes rare coin. Your glance becomes scripture. Your absence becomes the very air he struggles to breathe. He will not know why, he will not even be able to explain it, but you will have awakened the archetype of the seeker within him, and he will hunt not just for your body, but for the essence you guard. You must understand when a man meets a woman who is rooted in her own sovereignty, who does not collapse into him for identity, who allows him to feel the tension. Between her presence and her autonomy, his unconscious registers her as a portal. She becomes the mirror in which he sees not only what he desires, but what he could become. This is dangerous power. Not every man is ready for it. Some will flee, retreating to women who demand nothing of their soul. Others will step forward, drawn by something they cannot name, willing to cross deserts for even the promise of her. And if you give him that final thing, the thing you must never give unless you wish to keep him forever, it must not be your constant availability, nor your unquestioning devotion. It is the key to your unguarded self, the part of you that exists without performance, without the gentle masks you wear in the world. This is the gift that bonds him, not in infatuation, but in reverence. And if you hand it to him without requiring the trials, the patience, the proving, you will not have his forever. You will have his moment. Once the man senses the edges of this treasure but cannot yet hold it, his psyche begins its descent into the underworld. This is where the archetypal transformation begins, not in pleasure, but in tension. He becomes Orpheus, drawn by the faint song in the distance. Every interaction becomes a riddle, every smile a clue. This is not the manipulative withholding of a cold heart, but the conscious restraint of a woman who knows the value of her essence. In Jungian terms, you are awakening his process of individuation. By refusing to collapse into him, you are forcing him to face his own shadow, the parts of himself he has ignored, his insecurities, his control impulses. His unhealed wounds rise to the surface in the friction of wanting what he cannot simply claim. This is the point where weaker men will lash out, calling you distant or difficult, attempting to guilt you into relinquishing your boundary. Do not falter. A man who resents the sanctity of your inner world is not a man who could ever be trusted with it. Strong men capable of deep union will meet this tension differently. They will not try to force the gate. They will begin to build themselves into the kind of man who is worthy of standing inside it. The Stoics called this discipline of desire. Marcus Aurelius would have named it the art of aligning one's nature with virtue. A man willing to endure uncertainty for you, to wrestle with his own impulses rather than break your boundaries, is a man in the grip of a rare transformation. He is not merely pursuing a woman. He is ascending toward the man he was meant to be. This is why you must guard the gift. Not because love is a scarce resource, but because love without discernment becomes self-betrayal. When you give the unguarded self to a man who has not yet proven his ability to honor it, you invite the collapse of your own spirit. Your life force becomes his temporary entertainment instead of his lifelong devotion. You begin to dim, not because you have loved too much, but because you have loved without the container of respect. The empowered feminine understands that her role is not to save a man from his shadow, but to hold her own light steady while he chooses whether or not to meet her there. The moment you begin to over-explain your worth, to justify your boundaries, to plead for him to see your value, have already stepped out of your throne. And the throne is not a metaphor for arrogance. It is the seat of your psychological sovereignty. Without it, the dynamic shifts from sacred polarity to desperate negotiation. This polarity is not born from playing hard to get, it is born from being hard to forget. And that is achieved not through vanity or artifice, but through the way you live anchored in your own wholeness. The woman who does not need constant validation becomes a mirror in which a man sees his own emptiness more clearly. He will either flee from that reflection or grow because of it. Either outcome protects your soul. There is a temptation here, subtle but dangerous. The temptation to rush the unfolding because you crave the certainty of his devotion. This is the test of the feminine archetype Can she endure the unknown? Can she hold the tension without trying to resolve it prematurely? For in that tension, the man's longing deepens. It is in the uncertainty that he begins to associate you with the stirring of his own soul, and when that association is forged, it is nearly impossible to break. Think of the great myths. Psyche was not granted Eros's full presence until she had survived trials that tested her very essence. It was not cruelty. It was the shaping of a love that could withstand the inevitable winters of life. In the same way, a man must be tempered by the distance, the patience, the proving so that when he finally receives your unguarded self, it is not simply a pleasure to him, but a sacred trust. The modern world has convinced too many women that depth can be bypassed with intensity, that if the spark is bright enough, the structure will hold. But fire without a hearth burns the house down. Your boundaries, your restraint, your refusal to give the deepest part of you until it is earned. These are the stones of that hearth. Without them, the fire consumes itself and leaves nothing but ash. And so, the thing you must never give a man unless you want him forever is not merely your body, not merely your affection is the keys to the kingdom within you. It is the part of you that no one sees without walking the long road, that no one touches without bleeding for. To hand it over freely is to dissolve the myth before it is written. To guard it is to write the kind of story that is remembered for a lifetime. When the man draws nearer, when his footsteps echo in the corridors of your guarded realm, he begins to sense that what lies within is not something he can buy with charm or momentary gestures. His instincts warn him, this is not the fleeting rush of conquest, but the slow burn of devotion. And for the first time, perhaps in years, he feels the weight of what it means to truly win something worthy. It is here that his animatha, inner feminine, Jung spoke of, comes alive in full color. She whispers to him in dreams, in sudden pangs of memory when you are not there. In the quiet moments when he is forced to confront his own hollowness without you. You have not simply occupied his thoughts. You have become the mirror to his depths, the invitation to become more than the man he is now. And in this subtle but unstoppable way, you shift from being a woman he desires to the axis around which his inner growth begins to turn. This is the paradox the unawakened woman does not see. The more she rushes to give, the less a man feels the need to rise. But when she holds herself with disciplined grace, he senses that proximity to her is a privilege, not an entitlement. The male psyche is not tamed by excess. It is sharpened by scarcity, just as a diamond is not formed in open air, but under immense pressure. A man's reverence is born in the atmosphere of your unshaken boundaries. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus taught that if you want to be loved, you must make yourself worthy of love by your own virtue, not by demanding it from others. A man in the presence of a woman who will not barter her soul for attention must face the quiet question, what will I become to be worthy of what she guards? That question can become the forge in which his own nobility is reforged. And yet, many women fear this forge. They have been taught to equate love with constant emotional exposure, as though withholding anything is an act of cruelty. But in truth, what you are doing is protecting the sacred from the unready. You are ensuring that when you finally give him the unguarded self, he is not simply standing there as a passerby, but as the keeper of something he has already paid. For with his own evolution, men who are unprepared for this journey will misinterpret your restraint as disinterest. They will search for easier terrain, for women who confuse instant access with intimacy. Let them. A man unwilling to step into the unknown for you would never have stayed through the tempests of real union. Release them without bitterness. For every man who turns away from the guarded temple, there is one who will kneel at its gates, not to demand, but to earn his entrance. This is why the feminine must never apologize for her boundaries. Boundaries are not walls to keep love out. They are the sacred architecture that keeps love from collapsing. Without them, what begins as passion erodes into resentment. He cannot value what he has not worked for, and you cannot thrive in a love that costs you your soul. In the psychological dance between man and woman, the moment of unveiling is everything. Reveal too soon, and the hunger dies before it matures. Reveal too late, and suspicion rots the roots. The empowered woman learns the timing of her own tide, when to advance, when to retreat, when to let him wander the desert of her absence, and when to offer him a sip from the well. This timing is not taught by books or scripts. It is learned through the deep attunement to your own worth. For when you know your worth, you are not tempted to rush the unfolding. You can watch him wrestle with his desire without intervening to soothe his discomfort. You can let him feel the ache, the longing, the sharpening of his will, because you know that it is in that crucible that true devotion is born. And when, finally, the time comes to give him the one thing you have guarded, when the gates open and your unguarded self stands before him, it will not be a moment of casual pleasure. It will be the culmination of his journey, the proof of his transformation, the reward that seals not just his desire, but his loyalty. For a man who has bled for the Grail does not abandon it. He understands, perhaps for the first time, that he is not merely holding a woman, he is holding the rarest thing in the world, her trust. And yet, there is a deeper layer to this that few ever speak of, because it is not about the man at all, but about the woman's relationship with herself. For if you are to guard the treasure, you must first believe it is treasure. You must see your own depths as sacred, your own love as a rare current that should not be poured into every open vessel. This is where so many falter, not because they do not want respect, but because they have been conditioned to doubt that they deserve it. A woman who doubts her worth will give too quickly, not because she is generous, but because she is afraid that withholding will cause abandonment. She confuses self-sacrifice with love, forgetting that love without boundaries is not love at all, it is self-erasure. In Jung's language, she has not yet integrated her shadow. She still believes that her value depends on how others respond to her. So she offers the deepest parts of herself before the other has shown the capacity to honor them. But the woman who has met her own shadow walks differently. She does not fear the silence between messages. She does not crumble when the man pulls away to gather himself. She knows that her worth is not negotiated in these moments. It was set long before he appeared. This is the woman whose boundaries do not feel like bars, but like the gates of a temple gate that swing open only when reverence, patience, and truth are present. Men feel this difference. It is almost primal, the way they sense whether a woman is holding back from fear or from sovereignty. Fear invites testing. Sovereignty invites respect. The man will push against fear, trying to prove it wrong or break it down. But against sovereignty, he will pause, reassess, and approach with more care. It is here that the polarity shifts, and he begins to feel the weight of the journey you require of him. The Stoics would call this living in accordance with nature. Nature does not reveal all her beauty at once. She has seasons, cycles, thresholds. You do not see spring's blossoms in winter, nor do you taste ripe fruit before its time. If you try to force the bloom, you destroy it. Likewise, A woman in her power allows the relationship to ripen on its own clock. She knows the unveiling of her unguarded self is not a tool of seduction, it is a covenant, and so she lets him walk the long road, not to punish him, not to manipulate him, but because she understands that the road shapes the man as much as the destination does. Along the way, he will face his own impatience, his own need for control, his own fear of inadequacy. If he turns back, she loses nothing. Her worth was never tied to his perseverance. If he continues, each step deepens his attachment, for he is investing not just his desire, but his growth. When the time comes, and it will, there is a quiet knowing that fills the air between them. It is not a grand performance. It is not the explosive passion of the untested. It is the meeting of two souls who have seen each other in shadow and in light, who have built something in the space between longing and fulfillment. In that moment, when she gives him what she has guarded, he does not receive it as a conquest. He receives it as an honor. And honors, unlike trophies, are not abandoned for the next thrill. They are kept, protected, and cherished. The irony is that this gift, the one thing she must never give unless she wants him forever, is not something visible to the outside world. To others, it might look like nothing has changed. But within the man, a tectonic shift has occurred. He has stepped into a rarer form of possession, not over her, but of a place in her soul that will not be granted twice. And once a man has felt that depth, every shallow water tastes of loss. And from that moment, something irreversible takes root in him. He begins to realize that what he holds is not just love, but legacy, the kind of bond that threads itself through his very sense of identity. He cannot look at you without remembering the trials, the patience, the quiet nights of uncertainty he endured to stand where he stands now. You are not merely a woman in his life. You are the chapter of his becoming, and no man discards the story that made him more than he was. In Jungian terms, you have ceased to be only an external figure. You have become part of his internal architecture, woven into his anima, the feminine archetype that shapes his relationship to beauty, intimacy, and meaning itself. You have entered the realm of the symbolic, where you are no longer just a person but a living emblem of his higher longing. That is why, even if distance or circumstance should ever separate you, he will never fully unbind from what you represented. You have fused into the inner myth he lives by. This is the power of giving the unguarded self to a man who has earned it. It anchors you in his unconscious as both lover and muse. You are no longer in the arena of ordinary attraction, which fades with novelty. You are in the realm of devotion, which deepens with time. It is not an everyday bond. It is archetypal, like the hero and the oracle, the knight and the sacred flame. But there is a warning here. This power, though intoxicating, is not meant to be used as a weapon. To withhold forever out of pride or fear is to starve love until it withers. To grant it too soon is to give it two hands unready to hold it. The art lies in discernment, feeling the moment when his striving has transformed into steadiness, when his desire has matured into honor. That is when the gate opens without the bitterness of self-betrayal, and what is given in peace. The Stoics would remind you that even in this union, detachment is your ally. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nothing external is truly yours, only the soul you cultivate. The wise woman understands that even when she has given this most guarded gift, she does not lose herself within it. Her worth remains whole, untouched by the flux of his moods or the tides of life. She gives not to secure him, but to honor the meeting of equals. And in this equilibrium, the man changes too. The restless seeking that drove him to chase fades, replaced by a desire to protect, to preserve, to nurture the space that holds you both. He knows now that your trust is not a trophy but a living thing, something that can be destroyed if neglected, and something that will flourish if tended. In tending to it, he tends to himself, for the two have become intertwined. The modern world, obsessed with speed and instant gratification, rarely teaches this. We are told that if it feels right, it must be given now, that love should be effortless and constant. But effortless love is often shallow love, untempered by the tests that give it roots. What you have cultivated in him is not mere attachment, is reverence. And reverence, once awakened, does not vanish at the first sight of temptation. So the thing you must never give a man, unless you want him forever, is not simply your body, your time, or your affection. It is the unveiling of the soul that lives beneath all masks, the self that is not for public display, the self that carries your wounds and your wildness, your dreams and your despair. Give it only to the man who has proven he can hold it without breaking it, and in return, you will find that what he holds is not just you, but a part of himself he never knew before you. In this, you have done more than secure his devotion. You have altered his map of the world. You have given him not just love, but a myth to live by. And myths, once lived, cannot be undone. They become the bones of a man's life. There comes a stillness after this giving, a quiet unlike anything that came before. It is not the stillness of absence, nor the suffocating quiet of uncertainty. It is the stillness of two forces that have found their rightful place, yin and yang balanced. The hero and the beloved now inhabiting the same myth. The man feels it in his body like a homecoming, a deep exhale he didn't know he had been holding. From this stillness, his actions begin to shift. Where once there might have been performance gestures to impress, words to charm, there is now a steadiness that comes from knowing what he holds is rare and irreplaceable. The man who once sought conquest now seeks preservation. He no longer looks for new mountains to climb. He learns the terrain of the one sacred ground he has reached. Jung might describe this as the integration of the animal, where the external pursuit transforms into an internal union. The ideal he once projected onto an image is now anchored in reality, embodied in the woman before him. But unlike projection, which eventually shatters against reality's edges, this embodiment endures because it was built slowly, tested by distance, and tempered by time. He has come to see that the treasure he now holds is not an illusion, it is the true, unguarded self of another human being, offered in trust. This trust becomes his silent vow. He begins to measure himself, not by what he can gain, but by how well he can keep what he has been given. And because this gift was not freely scattered to any man who asked, he feels the weight of its exclusivity. He knows that to lose it would not simply be to lose a woman. It would be to lose the part of himself that rose to meet her. Here lies the subtle but profound truth. When a man loves a woman in this way, he is not merely attached to her, he is attached to the man he became because of her. This is why the bond resists decay. It is not just memory that keeps her alive in his mind, it is identity. Without her, he fears the regression to the lesser self he was before her gates ever opened. And you, the woman who gave with discernment, stand unchanged. In your essence, you did not dilute your soul to win him. You did not trade your boundaries for his presence. You required him to meet you in the fullness of who you are. And so the love that formed between you is love between equals, not love propped up by sacrifice. And in balance, the Stoics would call this the natural order of things. What comes into being in alignment with virtue is resilient, while what is born in desperation collapses under its own weight. Your restraint, your patience, your unwillingness to yield what was sacred until it could be honored, have built something that can withstand the winters of life. But there is another layer to this union, freedom, because you gave in your own time, without coercion. You are not bound to him by fear or dependency. You are bound only by choice. And in that freedom, paradoxically, the bond becomes stronger. A man knows when a woman stays because she chooses to, not because she must. That knowledge feeds his devotion more deeply than any chain could. Still, never forget this gift, though rare, is not a guarantee of forever. Life can shift. Circumstances can erode even the strongest walls. But the difference is this: if ever the bond were to break, he would carry the imprint of you like a sacred scar. Not every love leaves a man changed at his core. Yours will, because you never gave him the heart of you until he had proven he could hold it. And so, the thing you must never give a man, unless you want him forever, is the unveiling of that final, unprotected self, the one beyond the persona, beyond the careful masks. Once given to the right man, it becomes not a fleeting spark, but a fire that anchors itself into the story of his life. It makes you unforgettable not because of what you did for him, but because of who he had to become to stand beside you. There is a quiet kind of immortality in this, though it is not the immortality of legends or public glory. It is the kind that exists in the private architecture of another human being, the way your voice becomes the sound of guidance in his mind, the way your absence would feel like the tearing out of a foundation stone. This is not about dependence. It is about imprint. You have shaped the scaffolding of his inner world in a way that no other could, because you did not simply give, you required him to rise to meet the gift. The unguarded self, once entrusted, becomes both his compass and his mirror. When he strays from his integrity, he feels the dissonance immediately, as though the bond itself has shifted out of tune. When he stands in his strength, he senses your silent acknowledgement, the invisible thread that says, "Yes, you are the man I entrusted with this." This becomes his inner calibration, an almost spiritual accountability to the standard he met to stand beside you. In Jung's language, this is the alchemical union where two psyches do not merge into a formless whole, but each retains its sovereignty while being transformed by the other's presence. The masculine is sharpened by the challenge of the feminine's gates, and the feminine is steadied by the masculine's earned devotion. Both become more than they were, without losing what they are. This is the mistake the unawakened often make. Think love means surrendering the self entirely, dissolving all boundaries in the name of oneness. But real union is not dissolution. It is fusion without loss. The moment your love costs you the core of who you are, it has ceased to be love and has become submission. And submission to the wrong man is not romance, it is spiritual erosion. The man who has walked the long road to your soul understands this instinctively. He does not ask you to collapse into him because he knows it was your wholeness that drew him to you in the first place. He knows that if he destroys your sovereignty, he destroys the very magic that keeps his devotion alive. And so he protects it, not just for you, but for himself. The Stoics would call this harmony with virtue. Seneca wrote that the greatest wealth is to live content with little. In love, the parallel is that the greatest security is to live without trying to control what you cherish. This man does not grip you with fear, He holds you with trust. And trust, once it is truly earned, does not require the chains of constant proof. Still, there is danger even here, because the temptation to give away the unguarded self to freely never fully disappears. The world will always whisper that speed is passion, that withholding is cruelty, that boundaries are walls. But what the world calls walls, the wise call thresholds. Thresholds exist to ensure that what enters is meant to be there. Without them, every treasure is plundered. A man who receives your gift too easily will not feel its weight. A man who fights only for conquest will discard it when the chase is over. But the man who journeys for it, who becomes better for it, who learns himself through the waiting and the wanting, he will see it for what it is, not a prize, but a covenant. And you, when you give in this way, do so without fear. You do not hand him your unguarded self to bind him, to secure him, to make him stay. You give it because he has become the kind of man who can hold it without shattering it. That is the only reason to give. In this choice, you remain free. Free to walk beside him, free to walk away if the bond becomes dishonored, free from the need to convince him of your value. And that freedom is the paradox that makes him stain, not because he has to, but because he wants to. The woman who understands this has no need to chase. She chooses. She does not fear loss, because she has not bartered her soul for connection. She knows that what she gives cannot be taken by force, only received by worth. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.